The ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, not with admiration, but with the cold satisfaction of witnesses to a public execution. Lord Edmund Ashford stood at the grand staircase, his arm wrapped around another woman, and when his gaze finally met Alara's across the sea of silk and champagne, he didn't flinch. He smiled. That smile said everything. You were never enough. In that moment, Alara Whitcomb's world didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. But what happened next? That's the part no one saw coming. Not Edmund, not London society, not even Alara herself. So settle in, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. And if you want to see just how far one woman can fall and rise, then stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this journey takes us. The scandal broke on a Tuesday. Alara had been standing in the Ashford Estates rose garden when the first whisper reached her. She'd been admiring the late-season blooms, their petals heavy with morning dew, thinking about table arrangements for the wedding breakfast. Ivory roses, she'd decided, dozens of them, simple, elegant, a reflection of the life she was about to step into as the future Duchess of Ashford. Miss Whitcomb. The voice belonged to Catherine Bellamy, a girl Alara had known since childhood. Catherine's face was pale, her hands twisted in her skirts. "What is it?" Alara asked, smiling. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." Catherine's voice caught. "I thought you should know, before tonight, before the ball." "Know what?" Catherine glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in close. "Edmund. Lord Ashford. He's been seen with Lady Victoria Harlow, frequently, and there are rumors." Alara's smile didn't waver. "Catherine, Edmund knows half the women in London. That's hardly— He's going to announce it tonight." The words hung in the air like a blade. "Announce what?" "His engagement. To her." Alara's hands went cold. The roses blurred at the edges of her vision, their scent suddenly cloying, oppressive. "That's absurd. We're engaged. The banns have been read. The wedding is in 6 weeks." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Alara. I'm so sorry." But Alara couldn't hear her anymore. The world had gone distant, muffled, as though she were underwater. She turned and walked back toward the manor, her steps measured, her spine straight. She would go inside. She would find Edmund, and he would explain that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, except he wasn't inside. He was in the carriage house, leaning against a gleaming black phaeton, laughing with 2 of his friends. When he saw Alara approaching, his laughter died. "Alara!" He straightened, brushing dust from his jacket. "I wasn't expecting you until this evening." "Is it true?" His friends exchanged glances, then quietly slipped away. "Is what true?" Edmund asked, though his tone already carried the answer. "Victoria Harlow," he sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "I was going to tell you, tonight actually, after the ball." "Tell me what?" "That I've made a mistake." He met her eyes then, and there wasn't even the decency of guilt in them, just resignation. "You're a wonderful woman, Alara, truly, but I need more than wonderful. I need advantageous." "Advantageous?" "Victoria's father controls 3 shipping companies and half the coal mines in Lancashire. Her dowry is triple yours. And let's be honest, you and I both know your family's fortunes have been declining." The slap came before Alara even realized her hand had moved. The crack echoed through the carriage house, sharp and final. Edmund touched his cheek, his expression hardening. "You'll regret that." "The only thing I regret," Alara said, her voice shaking, "is ever believing you were worth my time." She turned and walked out, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of him. But she didn't go home. She went to the ball. The Ashford Ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers dripping light onto marble floors, walls papered in gold leaf, an orchestra playing Strauss from a raised dais. Alara had been to 100 balls just like it. She knew every rule, every step, every smile. Tonight, she would break them all. She entered alone without a chaperone, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk that her mother had once called too bold for an unmarried woman. Every head turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. And there, at the top of the grand staircase, stood Edmund, with Victoria Harlow on his arm. Victoria was everything Alara wasn't. Blonde where Alara was dark, delicate where Alara was tall, dressed in virginal white, dripping with diamonds that probably cost more than Alara's childhood home. Edmund saw her, Their eyes met across the sea of guests. And then he smiled. Not a sad smile. Not an apologetic one. A satisfied smile. He raised his hand and the orchestra fell silent. The room stilled. Every eye turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edmund began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "Thank you all for joining us this evening. I have an announcement to make, one that I hope will bring joy to all who know me." Alara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "It is my great honor," Edmund continued, turning to Victoria, "to announce my engagement to Lady Victoria Harlow, daughter of the Earl of Kensington. We will be married this December, and I hope you will all join us in celebrating this union." Applause erupted. Champagne glasses clinked. Victoria blushed prettily, tucking herself against Edmund's side. And every single person in that ballroom looked at Alara, not with pity, with satisfaction. This was what they'd come for. This was the real entertainment. Not the music, not the dancing, watching Alara Whitcomb's humiliation play out in real time. Someone near the door whispered, just loud enough to carry, "Poor thing. I always said she was reaching above her station. She must be mortified. I heard her family's nearly bankrupt. No wonder he chose Victoria." Alara stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She could leave. She could turn and walk out and never set foot in London society again. Or she could stay. She chose to stay. Slowly, deliberately, she walked toward the staircase. The crowd parted like water, their whispers growing louder, more vicious. Edmund watched her approach, his smile fading into something harder, wary. Alara stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at him. "Congratulations," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I hope Lady Victoria knows what she's getting." Victoria's smile faltered. Edmund's jaw tightened. "And what exactly is she getting?" he asked coldly. "A man who values ledgers over loyalty, who mistakes wealth for worth." Alara tilted her head. "But perhaps that's exactly what she deserves." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face went white. Edmund took a step down, his eyes blazing. "You forget yourself, Miss Whitcomb." "No," Alara said quietly. "I'm remembering myself, finally." She turned and walked toward the doors, her head high, her steps steady. Behind her, the whispers exploded into open gossip, cruel and gleeful. But Alara didn't look back. She walked out of the Ashford ballroom, out of the estate, out into the cold October night, and she kept walking. By the time she reached her family's townhouse, dawn was breaking over the Thames. Her feet ached, her gown was ruined, the hem caked in mud, but her mind was clear. Her mother met her at the door, still in her dressing gown, her face pale with worry. "Alara, where have you been? I heard. Everyone's heard." "I know what they've heard." Alara stepped inside, peeling off her gloves. "And I don't care." "Don't care? Alara, you've been publicly humiliated. Edmund Ashford has made you a laughingstock." "Then I'll leave." Her mother blinked. "Leave? Leave where?" "Anywhere but here." "You can't be serious. You have no prospects now, no suitors. If you disappear, you'll be forgotten entirely. You'll have nothing." Alara met her mother's eyes, and for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch from the disappointment she found there. "Good," she said simply. "Then I'll have nothing to lose." 3 days later, Alara boarded a coach heading north. She took only what she could carry, 2 trunks of clothes, a few books, and the last of her savings. Her mother had begged her to reconsider. Her younger sister Anne had cried. But Alara's father had simply pressed a purse of coins into her hand and said, "Write when you can." He didn't ask where she was going, because she didn't know. The coach rattled through villages she'd never heard of, past fields turning gold with autumn, through forests dense enough to block out the sky. She didn't speak to the other passengers, didn't ask their names. She simply watched the world pass by, feeling the city fall away with every mile. On the 5th day, the coach stopped in a hamlet called Ashford Crossing, a cruel irony that almost made her laugh. "Last stop before the Highlands," the driver announced. "Anyone staying? Now's the time." Alara peered out the window. The village was small, maybe 24 stone cottages clustered around a muddy square, a church with a crooked steeple, and a single inn that looked like it had been standing since the Normans. "Is there a school here?" she asked. The driver frowned. "Was. Burned down last spring. Lightning strike." "Why?" Because I'm a teacher. It wasn't true, not yet. But it would be. Alara stepped down from the coach, her trunks landing in the mud with a wet thud. The driver gave her a long, skeptical look, then shrugged and snapped the reins. The coach rolled away, leaving her alone in the square. A few villagers stared from their doorways. An old woman sweeping her stoop shook her head and muttered something Alara couldn't hear. She picked up her trunks and started walking. He said, the inn was called the Crossed Staves, and it smelled like damp wool in yesterday's stew. The innkeeper, a broad woman with flour-dusted hands and sharp eyes, looked Alara up and down. You lost? No, I need a room. You got coin. Alara set a sovereign on the counter. The innkeeper's eyes widened slightly. She pocketed the coin and nodded toward the stairs. Third door on the left, meals at dawn and dusk. No men after dark. I'm not expecting any. Good. The innkeeper paused. You running from something? Yes. The woman's expression softened, just a fraction. Aren't we all? But Alara spent the first week in silence. She walked the village, learning its rhythms. Fishermen hauled nets from the river at dawn. Women washed clothes in the communal stream. Children played in the mud, their laughter sharp and wild. No one spoke to her. No one asked her name. She didn't mind. On the 8th day, she found the remains of the school. It sat at the edge of the village, near the tree line, a blackened skeleton of timber and stone. Its roof collapsed, its walls charred. Wildflowers had begun to grow through the ruins, reclaiming the space. Alara stood in what had once been the doorway and imagined it whole. Rows of benches, a chalkboard, children bent over slates, their faces scrunched in concentration. You thinking of rebuilding? She turned. A man stood a few yards away, leaning against a tree. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His clothes were plain, work trousers, a linen shirt rolled to the elbows, boots caked in mud. But the way he carried himself, Alara had spent her whole life around nobility. She knew power when she saw it. Are you the landowner? She asked. Something like that. He pushed off the tree and walked closer, his gaze steady. Name's Rowan Hale. Alara Whitcomb. Whitcomb. He tilted his head. Any relation to the Whitcombs of Surrey? Her stomach tightened. Distant. He didn't press. Instead, he nodded toward the ruins. This was Clara Moss's school. She taught every child in the village for 30 years. When it burned, she tried to rebuild, but he shrugged. She died last winter, lung fever. And no one's tried since? Most folks here can't read themselves. Hard to teach what you don't know. Alara looked back at the blackened beams, the crumbled stone. I could rebuild it. Rowan raised an eyebrow. You're a builder now? I'm whatever I need to be. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. All right then, Miss Whitcomb. Let's see what you're made of. Rebuilding the school became Alara's entire world. Rowan provided the materials, timber, nails, slate, but he made it clear she'd have to do the labor herself. If you want the village to respect it, he said, they need to see you earn it. So she did. Every morning, she woke before dawn and walked to the ruins. She cleared debris, hauled stones, learned to swing a hammer without hitting her thumb. Her hands blistered, then calloused, her back ached, her muscles burned, and slowly the village began to notice. First it was just the children, 4 of them, ranging from 6 to 12, who wandered over to watch. Alara set them to work stacking stones, and they obeyed without question. Then a few of the mothers came, carrying baskets of bread and cheese. They didn't speak much, but they stayed, helped. By the 3rd week, even some of the men joined, grumbling about fool women's projects, but showing up with tools and strong backs nonetheless. And through it all, Rowan watched. He didn't help directly, didn't lift a single beam, but he was there, leaning against trees, sitting on stone walls, his dark eyes tracking her every move. You're enjoying this, Alara said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. Enjoying what? Watching me struggle, he grinned. Maybe a little. You're insufferable. So I've been told. But that night, when she returned to the inn, exhausted and filthy, she found a new pair of work gloves waiting on her bed. No note, no explanation, just the gloves. The school took 2 months to rebuild. When it was finished, it wasn't grand. The roof was uneven. The walls were patched with mismatched stone. But it stood. solid, real. Alara stood in the doorway on the first morning, watching the children file in, 10 of them now, their faces scrubbed, their eyes wide. "Sit," she said, and they obeyed. She walked to the front of the room, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote on the board, "Knowledge is freedom." Then she turned to face them. "My name is Miss Whitcomb, and I'm going to teach you to read." One of the boys, a scrawny thing named Tom, raised his hand. "Why?" "Because," Alara said, "the world is run by people who can read, and I think it's time you became one of them." The children stared at her, then slowly Tom grinned. Months passed. The school became the heart of the village. Alara taught reading, writing, arithmetic. She told stories, answered questions, helped the children see beyond the boundaries of Ashford Crossing, and for the first time in her life she felt useful. Not ornamental, not decorative. Useful. But London hadn't forgotten her. On a cold February morning, a carriage arrived in the village square, black lacquer, polished brass, drawn by 4 matched horses. Alara was in the schoolhouse when she heard the commotion. She stepped outside, shading her eyes against the winter sun. The carriage door opened, and Edmund Ashford stepped out. He looked thinner than she remembered, older. His coat was expensive, his boots polished, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He saw her, froze. "Alara." She didn't move, didn't speak. Edmund crossed the square slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. When he reached her, he stopped, searching her face. "I've been looking for you." "Why?" "Because I made a mistake." Alara laughed, short, sharp, humorless. "Now you realize that?" "Victoria and I—" He hesitated. "It didn't work. The marriage. She wanted things I couldn't give. I wanted things she didn't understand. We separated last month." "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not." "No," Alara agreed. "I'm not." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I came to ask you to come back. To London. To me." The words hung in the cold air. Behind Alara, the schoolhouse door creaked open. Rowan stepped out, his expression unreadable. Edmund's gaze flicked to him, then back to Alara. This is Rowan Hale," Alara said evenly. "He owns the land." "And you're what? His mistress?" Rowan moved then, just a single step forward, but it was enough to make Edmund flinch. "Careful," Rowan said quietly. Alara held up a hand. "It's fine." She turned back to Edmund. "You want me to come back? To what? To be your second choice again? To live in a city that made me into a joke?" "I can fix that. I have influence. I can—" "No." The word was final. Absolute. "You can't fix anything, Edmund, because there's nothing left to fix. I don't want your influence. I don't want your name. I don't want you." Edmund's face went pale. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret," Alara said, echoing her own words from that terrible night, "is not realizing sooner that I was worth more than you ever gave me credit for." She turned and walked back into the schoolhouse. Edmund stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then he climbed back into his carriage and left. That night, Rowan found Alara sitting on the stone wall behind the school, watching the stars. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her. After a while, she spoke. "Do you ever regret leaving your old life?" Rowan was quiet, then, "Every day." She glanced at him. "Then why stay?" "Because regret doesn't mean I made the wrong choice." He looked at her, his dark eyes steady in the moonlight. "Some things are worth the cost." Alara held his gaze, and for the first time since that terrible night in the Ashford ballroom, she smiled. Not out of politeness, not out of duty, but because she meant it. "Yes," she said softly. "They are." Spring came to Ashford Crossing like a promise that couldn't be trusted. The frost melted. Wildflowers pushed through the mud. The river swelled with snowmelt, rushing past the village with a sound like distant applause. But Alara had learned not to trust promises anymore. She'd learned that even beautiful things could turn sharp when you weren't looking. The school was thriving. 18 children now, packed into the small room, their slates scratching, their voices rising in unison as they recited multiplication tables. Alara moved between the rows, correcting posture, adjusting grips on chalk, answering questions that ranged from earnest to absurd. "Miss Whitcomb?" a girl named Bess asked, squinting at her slate. "If I learn all this reading, can I go to London?" If you want to. Do you want to? The other children went quiet, their eyes swiveling toward Alara with that peculiar intensity only children could muster, hungry for honesty, allergic to lies. No, Alara said simply. I don't. Why not? Mum says London's got shops tall as trees and carriages everywhere, and London's loud, Alara interrupted gently, and crowded, and people there care more about what you look like than who you are. She crouched beside Bess's desk. Here, you can become anything. There, you have to fit into boxes other people built for you. Bess frowned, considering this. Then she nodded and went back to her slate. But Tom, always Tom, raised his hand from the back row. What? Did someone put you in a box, miss? Alara's throat tightened. Yes. Did you get out? I'm trying to. Tom grinned, gap-toothed and fierce. Good. After the children left for the day, Alara stayed behind, sweeping the floor and organizing the small library she'd started. Donations from Rowan mostly, leather-bound volumes on everything from agriculture to astronomy. She was shelving a book on botanical illustration when the door creaked open. Not Rowan. A woman stood in the doorway. Middle-aged, elegantly dressed despite the mud on her traveling cloak, her hair pinned in a style that screamed London sophistication. She looked around the schoolhouse with an expression Alara recognized immediately, polite disdain masquerading as curiosity. Miss Whitcomb. Alara set the book down. Can I help you? I certainly hope so. The woman stepped inside, pulling off her gloves with practiced precision. My name is Harriet Langford. I'm a member of the London Educational Reform Society. We've heard rumors about what you're doing here. Rumors? That you've established a school in a village with no formal accreditation, no government support, and no proper funding. That you're teaching children of the laboring class to read works far beyond their station. Alara crossed her arms. And? Harriet blinked. And we find that concerning. Why? Because education, Miss Whitcomb, is a delicate matter. One must consider the consequences of teaching certain ideas to certain populations. Agricultural workers, for instance, don't need Shakespeare. They need practical skills. They need both. Do they? Harriet's smile was thin. Or do you simply need to feel important? The words landed like a slap. Alara felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. I think you should leave. I'm not here to shut you down, Harriet said quickly. Quite the opposite. The society would like to help, provide funding, materials, oversight. To ensure quality, of course. We'd send an inspector quarterly, review your curriculum, make recommendations. No? Harriet's smile froze. Excuse me? I said no. This school doesn't need your oversight or your recommendations. It needs to exist without people like you deciding what's appropriate for people you've never met. People like me, Harriet repeated slowly, her tone crystallizing into ice, are the reason schools like this can survive at all. Without us, you're just a woman playing teacher in a barn. Then I'll play teacher in a barn. Harriet stared at her for a long moment. Then she pulled her gloves back on, one finger at a time. You're making a mistake, Miss Whitcomb. The society has considerable influence. If we decide you're a problem, then I'll deal with it. Harriet's lips pressed into a bloodless line. She turned and walked out without another word, her skirt snapping against the doorframe. Alara stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, her hands shaking. She'd just made an enemy she couldn't afford. That evening, she told Rowan about the visit. They were sitting in the main room of his estate, a sprawling, half-ruined manor house he'd bought for almost nothing and had been slowly restoring. The place was a mess of contradictions. Grand fireplaces filled with cheap coal, silk wallpaper peeling beside fresh plaster, priceless oil paintings leaning against walls waiting to be hung. Rowan listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, he said, You should have taken their money. Alara's head snapped up. What? Their money, their materials. Smile, nod, let them think they're in charge, then do whatever you want anyway. That's dishonest. That's survival. He leaned forward. You think the people who run this country got there by being honest? They got there by being smart. And right now, you're being stubborn. I'm being principled. Principles don't feed children, Alara. They don't keep roofs over heads or books in hands. Money does. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. If I wanted cynical advice, I would have stayed in London. London's the reason you're here. His voice was quiet but sharp. Don't pretend it's not. The truth of it hit her like cold water. She stood there, breathing hard, her vision blurring at the edges. Rowan sighed, stood, crossed the room and stopped a few feet away, giving her space. I'm not saying abandon your principles, he said more gently. I'm saying pick your battles. Because if the society decides you're a threat, they'll crush you. And they won't even blink. Then what do? You build alliances. Find people who believe in what you're doing, people with influence, with money, with power. Make them need you more than they need to control you. Alara wiped her eyes roughly. And where exactly do I find these magical allies? Rowan's mouth quirked. You're looking at one. She stared at him. I'm not a lord anymore, he continued, but I still have friends in Parliament, people who owe me favors. Let me make some inquiries, quietly. Why would you do that? He didn't answer right away, just looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, because you're the first person I've met in 5 years who's trying to build something instead of tear it down, and I'd like to see what happens if you succeed. Alara's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might make things worse. You usually do. He laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised, and for a moment the tension broke. But it didn't last. 2 weeks later, the river flooded. It happened overnight. A spring storm that dumped rain like a biblical punishment, swelling the river until it breached its banks and roared through the village. By dawn, half the cottages were knee-deep in water. Livestock drowned, gardens washed away. The bridge that connected Ashford Crossing to the main road collapsed into the current, its timbers spinning downstream like matchsticks. The school survived, barely. Water lapped at the foundation, but the building held. Alara waded through the flooded square, her skirts dragging, her boots squelching. People stood in doorways, staring at the devastation with blank, shell-shocked faces. We need to move everyone to higher ground, Rowan said, appearing at her elbow. His shirt was soaked, his hair plastered to his skull. The manor's on a hill. It'll hold. How many can it fit? Everyone, if we pack them in. So they did. For 3 days, Rowan's half-finished manor became a refugee camp. Families crowded into empty rooms. Fires burned in every hearth. Children slept in piles on floors covered with whatever blankets could be scavenged. Alara moved through the chaos, distributing food, tending to a woman with a fever, calming a child who wouldn't stop screaming. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the river rising, the bridge collapsing, the faces of people who'd lost everything. On the 4th day, the water receded. The village that emerged looked like a corpse. Mud everywhere. Furniture ruined. Walls sagging. The stench of rot and riverweed hung in the air like a shroud. Alara stood in the schoolhouse doorway, staring at the destruction. The books were gone. All of them. Swollen with water, their pages melted together, unreadable. The slates had survived, but the benches were warped, the walls streaked with mildew. She sank onto the front step, her head in her hands. It's not as bad as it looks. She looked up. Tom stood in front of her, his trousers rolled to his knees, his bare feet caked in mud. Tom, go home. Can't. Home's full of water still. He sat beside her. But we can fix the school. We did it once. We can do it again. With what? We have no books, no money, We got you. Alara's eyes burned. I don't know if that's enough. Tom shrugged. Only one way to find out. That night, Alara sat with Rowan in the manor's study, both of them exhausted, both of them filthy. The village needs supplies, Rowan said flatly. Timber, nails, food, seed for replanting. I can cover some of it, but not all. Not if we're going to rebuild properly. How much do we need? He named a sum that made her stomach drop. That's impossible. Not impossible. Just difficult. He rubbed his face. I can write to my contacts in London, but it'll take weeks to hear back, and even then they might say no. Yeah. Alara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the moon hung low over the flooded fields, turning the water into a sheet of silver. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled. There's another option, she said quietly. Rowan's chair creaked. What option? I could go to London. Silence. Alara, I still have contacts, people who owe my family favors. If I went myself, if I asked in person, they'll destroy you. Rowan's voice was hard. You walk back into that city, and they'll tear you apart. You know that. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see that I'm not the same person who left. They won't see anything except an opportunity to gloat. Alara turned to face him. Then let them gloat. If it means these people get what they need, let them laugh at me until they're sick with it. Rowan stood, crossing the room in 3 strides. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Why? Because it's my fault. How the hell is a flood your fault? Because I started this. Her voice cracked. I told these people they could be more than what London decided they were. I told their children they mattered. And now they're drowning in mud because I thought I could play savior. Stop. Rowan's hands came up, gripping her shoulders. You didn't cause this, nature did. And you're not playing anything. You rebuilt a school with your bare hands. You taught children who've never had a chance. That's not playing, that's real. Alara's vision blurred. Then let me do something real now. He stared at her for a long moment. Then his hands dropped and he stepped back. Fine, but I'm going with you. Rowan, not negotiable. You walk into that snake pit alone, you won't walk out. I know those people. I know how they operate. You need someone who can fight dirty. Despite everything, Alara almost smiled. And that's you? That's me? They left the next morning, taking Rowan's fastest carriage and a letter of introduction he'd written to a banker named Cornelius Webb, a man Rowan described as rich, ruthless, and bored enough to find our disaster entertaining. The journey to London took 5 days. 5 days of cramped quarters, bad roads, and silence punctuated by brief, tense conversations. Rowan read. Alara stared out the window, watching the countryside blur past, her stomach knotting tighter with every mile. On the 6th day, they reached the city. London hit her like a wall of sound, carriages clattering, vendors shouting, church bells clanging, the press of bodies and noise and smoke. She'd forgotten how loud it was, how suffocating. They took rooms at a modest hotel near Cheapside, nothing like the places Alara had once stayed, but clean and anonymous. That evening, Rowan laid out the plan. We meet Webb tomorrow. He'll want details, numbers, projections, proof that rebuilding the village is worth his investment. Can you provide that? Alara nodded. She'd spent the journey drafting a proposal, complete with cost estimates and projected outcomes. Good. He'll also want to know why he should care. That's where you come in. Me? You're the story, the fallen noblewoman who rebuilt a village from nothing. That's the kind of thing men like Webb eat up. Makes them feel philanthropic without actually having to get their hands dirty. So I'm a curiosity. Your leverage. Use it. Alara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. The meeting was set for noon at Webb's offices, a gleaming building in the financial district, all marble and brass and the smell of money. Cornelius Webb turned out to be exactly what Alara expected. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Rowan, he said, shaking hands. It's been too long. I heard you'd buried yourself in the countryside. Something like that. Webb's gaze shifted to Alara. And you must be the infamous Miss Whitcomb. Alara's stomach dropped. Infamous? Oh, come now. The woman who slapped Edmund Ashford in front of half of London? You're a legend. Rowan shot her a look that said, don't. Alara forced a smile. That's one word for it. They sat. Webb poured brandy no one touched. Alara laid out the proposal. Clear, concise, professional. She spoke about the flood, the damage, the cost of rebuilding. She talked about the school, the children, the potential for the village to become a model for rural education reform. Webb listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. Interesting, but I have a question. Of course. Why should I care? The bluntness of it caught her off guard. Because people are suffering. People are always suffering, Miss Whitcomb. That's not a reason. That's a fact. Rowan's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair, but he stayed silent. Alara took a breath. Then let me give you a better reason. Invest in this village, and you'll be investing in the future. Educated workers are more productive. Communities with infrastructure attract commerce. And when word gets out that you, Cornelius Webb, rebuilt an entire village out of the kindness of your heart, every reformist in Parliament will owe you a favor. Webb's smile widened. Now that's a reason. So you'll help? On one condition. Alara's heart sank. What condition? I want a return, not financially. I have enough money. But I want recognition, a plaque, a dedication. Something that makes it clear this village exists because of me. Alara's nails bit into her palms. Fine. And I want you to give a speech. At the unveiling. Something about resilience and second chances and the triumph of the human spirit, that sort of thing. You want me to perform. I want you to inspire. There's a difference. Is there? Webb's smile didn't waver. Take it or leave it, Miss Whitcomb. Alara looked at Rowan. He gave the smallest nod. She turned back to Webb. We'll take it. Excellent. He raised his untouched brandy. To new beginnings. Alara didn't raise her glass. They left Webb's offices an hour later, the promise of funding secured, but the taste of it sour in Alara's mouth. You did well, Rowan said as they walked toward the carriage. I prostituted myself. You negotiated. I let a man use me as a mascot for his ego. And in exchange, you saved a village. Rowan stopped, turning to face her. You think that's shameful? It's not. It's smart. And it's exactly what those children need. Alara looked away, her throat tight. Come on, Rowan said more gently. Let's get out of here before someone recognizes you. But it was already too late. Alara? The voice came from behind them, familiar, cold, precise. Alara turned, and there, standing on the pavement in a gown of ice blue silk, was Victoria Harlow. Victoria looked different. Not worse. Victoria would never allow herself to look worse, but hollow. Her dress was expensive, her hair perfectly arranged, her posture flawless. But her eyes were rimmed with something that makeup couldn't quite hide. Exhaustion, maybe. Or disappointment. She stopped a few feet away, her gloved hands clasped at her waist. I thought I saw you, Victoria said. I told myself it couldn't be, but here you are. Alara's throat went dry. Victoria, and you've brought a companion. Victoria's gaze shifted to Rowan, cool and appraising. How progressive of you. We're conducting business, Rowan said flatly. Nothing more. Of course. Victoria's smile was thin as paper. Just as I'm sure Alara's presence in London is purely coincidental. It is. Is it? Victoria tilted her head. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to claw your way back into society. How desperately sad. Alara felt heat crawl up her neck. I'm not trying to do anything except help people who need it. How noble. And who's funding this charity work? Him? Victoria nodded toward Rowan. Or have you found another wealthy man to subsidize your moral superiority? Rowan stepped forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. That's enough. Victoria's eyes flashed. You don't get to tell me what's enough. You don't know what she cost me. Alara blinked. What I cost you? Yes. You. Victoria's composure cracked, just slightly. Do you know what it's like to be chosen as a replacement? To walk into a marriage knowing you're second best? That every time he looked at me, he was comparing me to someone else? The words hit harder than Alara expected. Edmund chose you, she said quietly. Not me. He made that very clear. He chose my money, my connections. He chose what I represented, not who I was. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Just like you're not here for business. You're here because you need something, money, probably, or influence. And you'll smile and perform and pretend you're better than the rest of us, but you're not. You're exactly the same. Alara's hands curled into fists. You don't know me. Don't know. I know enough. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping. I know you ran away instead of fighting. I know you built a little fantasy life in some nowhere village where no one knows what a failure you are. And I know that the moment things got hard, you came crawling back to the city you claimed to hate. Victoria. Save it! Victoria turned to leave, then paused. Edmund asks about you, you know, even now, even after everything. He still thinks about you. Alara's stomach twisted. I don't care. Liar. Victoria looked back over her shoulder. You've always cared. That's your weakness. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians like smoke. Alara stood frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. Rowan's hand touched her elbow. Ignore her. What if she's right? She's not. How do you know? Because I've watched you rebuild a school with your bare hands. I've watched you teach children who had nothing. That's not failure. That's the opposite. Alara closed her eyes. Then why does it feel like I'm right back where I started? Because London makes everyone feel small. That's the point. Rowan's grip tightened slightly. Come on, let's get out of here. They returned to the hotel in silence. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, Victoria's words circling in her mind like vultures. You're exactly the same. Was she? She'd told herself she'd changed, that she'd become someone different, someone stronger. But here she was, back in London, begging rich men for money, letting herself be used as a symbol instead of a person. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she hadn't changed at all. Around midnight, someone knocked on her door. Elara sat up, her heart racing. "Who is it?" "Rowan." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. Rowan stood in the hallway, fully dressed, his expression grim. "Get dressed. We're leaving." "Now? It's the middle of the night." "I know, but I just got word from one of my contacts. Edmund's in London, and he knows you're here." Alara's blood went cold. "How?" "Victoria, probably. Or someone else who saw you. Does it matter?" He stepped inside, keeping his voice low. "The point is, if he finds you, he'll make a scene, and that scene will undermine everything we just accomplished with Webb. So we run. We retreat strategically." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not. Running is cowardice. Retreating is survival." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Pack your things. We leave in 20 minutes. Alara didn't argue. They were on the road before dawn, the carriage rattling through empty streets, the city still dark and sleeping. Alara pressed her forehead against the window, watching London disappear behind them. "Do you regret it?" Rowan asked after a while. "What?" "Coming here. Facing them." Alara considered the question. "No, but I regret that it was necessary." "It's always necessary. That's the problem with people like us." "People like us? People who left. We can never fully escape because the world we left still has claws in us. It'll drag us back whenever it wants." Alara looked at him. "Is that why you stayed at the manor? To keep the claws at bay?" "Something like that." "What happened to you, Rowan? Why did you leave?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I killed someone." The words hung in the air, stark and unadorned. Alara's breath caught. "What?" "Not murder. A duel." Rowan's voice was flat, emotionless. "Stupid. Pointless. Over a woman I didn't even love. But the man died anyway. And the scandal destroyed my family's name. So I left, bought the manor, buried myself where no one would ask questions. Does anyone know? You do. Now." Alara didn't know what to say. She wanted to ask more, who the man was, what the woman's name had been, whether Rowan regretted it. But the look on his face told her the conversation was over. They rode in silence after that, the miles stretching between them and London like a widening wound. They reached Ashford Crossing 4 days later, exhausted and covered in road dust. The village looked better than when they'd left. The water had fully receded. People were rebuilding, slowly, painstakingly, but rebuilding. The sight of it made Alara's chest ache. Tom met them in the square, grinning. "You're back. Did you get the money?" "We got it," Alara said. Tom whooped and ran off to spread the news. Within an hour, the villagers had gathered in the square. Alara stood on the steps of the schoolhouse and told them what had been arranged, the funding, the materials, the timeline for rebuilding. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. It spread through this crowd, slow at first, then building into something louder, fiercer. People cheered. Children laughed. An old woman grabbed Alara's hand and kissed it, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You saved us," she whispered. Alara's throat tightened. "We saved ourselves." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of what she'd promised. The speech, the dedication, the performance. She'd sold a piece of herself to make this happen, and she wasn't sure she could ever get it back. Rebuilding began the next week. Timber arrived by the wagon load. Nails, tools, seed, livestock, everything Webb had promised, delivered with ruthless efficiency. The villagers threw themselves into the work with a fervor that bordered on desperation. They had to rebuild before winter, before the next disaster, before the fragile momentum broke. Alara worked alongside them, her hands raw, her back aching. But something had shifted inside her. She felt hollowed out, like a bell that had been struck too many times and lost its resonance. Rowan noticed. "You're not sleeping," he said one evening as they stood on the hill overlooking the village. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Alara turned to face him. "What do you want me to say? That I feel like a fraud? That every time someone thanks me, I think about standing in Webb's office, letting him turn me into a prop?" "You did what you had to do." "That doesn't make it right." "Right and wrong are luxuries, Alara. People who are drowning don't care about philosophy. They care about air. Is that how you justify it? The duel? The man you killed? Rowan's expression darkened. I don't justify it. I live with it. There's a difference. Alara looked away, her eyes burning. I don't know if I can. Then you'll learn. Or you'll break. Those are the only options. Before she could respond, a shout echoed from the village. They both turned. A carriage was coming up the road. Black lacquer, polished brass, moving fast. Alara's stomach dropped. No. Rowan's hand went to her shoulder. Stay here. Rowan, stay here. He started down the hill, his stride long and purposeful. Alara ignored him and followed. The carriage stopped in the square. The door opened. Edmund Ashford stepped out. He looked worse than when he'd come before. Thinner, older. His clothes were rumpled, his cravat askew. But his eyes burned with something desperate and feral. Alara, he called, his voice cracking. I know you're here. I saw you in London. Victoria told me. Rowan stepped between them. You need to leave. I'm not talking to you. Edmund tried to push past, but Rowan didn't move. Alara, please. I need to speak with you. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Alara walked forward slowly, her heart pounding. You shouldn't be here. I know, but I had to. Edmund's voice broke. Everything's falling apart. The investments Victoria's father promised, they collapsed. The estate's mortgaged. I'm drowning in debt. And I realized too late, that the only real thing I ever had was you. The words landed like stones in water, sinking without impact. That's not my problem, Alara said. I know it's not. But I thought, if I could just explain, if you could just listen. I did listen, 2 years ago, when you stood at the top of that staircase and humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. I listened then, and I learned exactly what you thought I was worth. Edmund flinched. I made a mistake. You made a choice, and I regret it. Every day I regret it. His voice rose, raw and ragged. Do you know what it's like to wake up next to someone and know you chose wrong? To see her looking at you with contempt because she knows you settled? To lose everything and realize the one person who might have stood by you is gone because you were too much of a coward to see her value? Alara's chest ached, but she forced her voice to stay steady. I'm sorry you're suffering. I truly am. But I can't fix this for you. I won't. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to forgive me. No. The word came out harder than she intended. Edmund staggered back as though she'd struck him. Alara, no. You don't get forgiveness. You don't get closure. You get to live with what you did the same way I had to. She took a breath. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll learn to be a better person. But that's not my responsibility. It's yours. Edmund's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, might beg. Then he climbed back into the carriage. But before the driver could snap the reins, Victoria appeared. She stepped out from behind the carriage, her expression unreadable. I came with him, she said quietly. I wanted to see if you'd take him back. Alara stared at her. Why? Because I needed to know if I was wrong about you. Victoria's voice was soft, almost fragile. I told myself you were weak, that you ran because you couldn't handle the fight. But I was the one who was weak, wasn't I? Victoria. I stayed with him for 2 years. 2 years of knowing he didn't love me. 2 years of pretending it didn't matter, because leaving would mean admitting I'd made a mistake. She laughed, hollow and broken. But you left. You walked away from everything and built something real. And I called you a failure. Alara's throat tightened. You were angry. I was jealous. Victoria's eyes glittered with unshed tears. I still am. Then leave him. Build your own life. It's not that simple. It never is. But you do it anyway. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, sharp, and climbed back into the carriage. Edmund didn't look at Alara as they drove away. He kept his eyes forward, his shoulders slumped, his hands gripping his knees. Watching them go, Alara felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not triumph, just release. The months that followed were brutal. The village rebuilt faster than anyone expected, fueled by a mix of desperation and determination. Houses rose from the mud. Fields were replanted. The bridge was reconstructed, stronger than before. And through it all, Alara threw herself into the work, teaching during the day, helping rebuild at night, collapsing into bed, too exhausted to dream. But the closer they got to completion, the tighter the knot in her stomach became, because Webb's dedication ceremony was approaching, and she'd have to stand in front of everyone and perform exactly the way he wanted. The night before the ceremony, Rowan found her sitting on the hill, staring at the stars. "You don't have to do this," he said, sitting beside her. "Yes, I do." "No. You could walk away. Tell Webb to go to hell. We'd find another way." "There is no other way." "You know that." Rowan was quiet. Then, "Do you remember what you told Tom? About London putting people in boxes?" "Yes. You're doing it to yourself now. You're putting yourself in a box labeled martyr, and it's just as much a trap as anything London built." Alara looked at him. "What else am I supposed to do?" "Be honest. Stand up there and tell the truth. Not the story Webb wants, the story you want. And if he pulls his funding, then we'll survive. We always do." Alara wanted to believe him, but belief felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The ceremony took place on a cold November morning. The entire village gathered in the square. Webb arrived in a gleaming carriage, accompanied by a photographer and 2 journalists from London papers. He smiled and shook hands and posed for pictures, every inch the benevolent philanthropist. Alara stood to the side, watching, her stomach churning. When it was time for the speeches, Webb went first. He talked about progress, about the importance of education, about his commitment to uplifting the working class. The words were smooth, practiced, empty. Then he gestured to Alara. "And now, I'd like to introduce Miss Alara Whitcomb, the woman whose vision and dedication made this all possible." Applause rippled through the crowd. Alara stepped forward, her legs unsteady. She looked out at the faces, Tom, Bess, the old woman who'd kissed her hand, Rowan standing at the back with his arms crossed. Webb leaned in, his voice low. "Remember, inspiration, resilience, keep it uplifting." Alara nodded. Then she opened her mouth and told the truth. 2 years ago, I came to this village because I had nowhere else to go. I'd been publicly humiliated, abandoned by the man I thought I'd marry, and cast out by a society that valued appearances over substance. I didn't come here to save anyone. I came here to hide. Webb's smile froze. "But these people," Alara gestured to the crowd, "they didn't let me hide. They put tools in my hands and told me to work. They taught me that worth isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one choice at a time." A few people nodded. Tom grinned. "Mr. Webb's money helped rebuild this village, but it didn't save it. You did. You saved yourselves. And no plaque, no dedication, no speech can take that away from you." Webb's jaw tightened. The journalist scribbled furiously. "So thank you, Mr. Webb, for your generosity. But don't mistake generosity for ownership. This village belongs to the people who bled for it, and it always will." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Tom started clapping. It spread, slowly at first, then building into something fierce and defiant. The villagers cheered. The old woman wiped her eyes. Webb's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. When the applause finally died, he stepped forward, his smile brittle. "Quite the performance, Miss Whitcomb. Though perhaps a bit off script." "I wasn't reading from a script." "Clearly." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You've just made a very powerful enemy." "Good," Alara said. "I was getting tired of weak ones." Webb's eyes narrowed. Then he turned and walked back to his carriage, the journalists trailing after him like ducklings. Rowan appeared at Alara's elbow, his expression somewhere between admiration and exasperation. "Well," he said, "that's done it." "I know. He'll try to destroy you." "Let him try," Rowan laughed, short and surprised. "You're insane." "Probably." They stood together, watching the crowd disperse, the village returning to its routines. And for the first time in months, Alara felt something like peace. But it didn't last. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Alara was in the schoolhouse grading slates when Rowan burst through the door. His face was pale. "What is it?" she asked, standing. He handed her the letter without a word. It was from the London Educational Reform Society, signed by Harriet Langford. "Dear Miss Whitcomb, it has come to our attention that your school operates without proper accreditation or government oversight. Furthermore, recent reports suggest you have publicly defamed a respected philanthropist and undermined the integrity of charitable work in rural communities. Effective immediately, the Society is launching a formal investigation into your practices. Should we find evidence of negligence, impropriety, or incompetence, We will petition the Crown to shut down your operation permanently. You have 30 days to comply with our inquiry. Regards, Harriet Langford, Director, London Educational Reform Society. Alara's hands trembled. They can't do this. They can, and they will. Rowan's voice was grim. Webb must have called in favors, and Langford's been waiting for an excuse since you turned her down. So what do we do? We fight, or we run. Alara looked at the letter, then at the schoolhouse, the walls she'd rebuilt, the benches she'd sanded, the children's slates stacked neatly in the corner. We fight, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Because this time, she wasn't fighting London's cruelty. She was fighting its power. And power, she was learning, didn't forgive. Alara read the letter 3 more times, each pass making the words feel heavier, more final. Rowan paced the length of the schoolhouse, his boots echoing against the floorboards. 30 days. That's not enough time to mount a proper defense. Then we won't mount a proper defense. Alara set the letter down, her jaw tightening. We'll do something they won't expect. Like what? I don't know yet. She pressed her palms against the desk, steadying herself. But I'm done playing by their rules. Every time I do, I lose. Rowan stopped pacing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Langford and Webb want a scandal. They want to prove I'm unfit, incompetent, dangerous. So we give them the opposite. The opposite of a scandal? Proof. Evidence that what we're doing here works. Not just works, succeeds. We document everything. Student progress, community impact, literacy rates. We turn this village into a case study they can't ignore. Rowan frowned. That'll take weeks. Maybe months. We have 30 days. We make it work in 30 days. And if we can't? Alara met his eyes. Then we lose. But at least we'll lose on our own terms. The next morning, Alara called a meeting. Every parent in the village crammed into the schoolhouse, their faces wary. They'd heard about the letter. News traveled fast in a place this small, and they knew what it meant. Alara stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped to keep them from shaking. The London Educational Reform Society wants to shut us down, she said without preamble. They claim we're operating illegally, that we're harming your children instead of helping them. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But we're not going to let that happen. Not without a fight. She took a breath. I need your help. I need you to let me test the children, reading, writing, arithmetic, and record the results. I need you to write statements about how the school has changed your families. I need proof that this place matters. A man near the back, John Fletcher, a blacksmith with arms like tree trunks, crossed his arms. And what if we do all that and they still shut you down? Then we'll know we tried everything. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Alara's voice cracked slightly. I can't promise you victory. I can't even promise you fairness. But I can promise you this. I will fight for your children until I have nothing left to give. The room went quiet. Then Tom's mother, a small, weathered woman named Mary, stood up. My boy couldn't write his own name a year ago, she said. Now he writes letters to his grandmother every week. That's worth fighting for. Another woman stood, then another. Within minutes, half the room was on its feet. John Fletcher uncrossed his arms. What do you need us to do? Alara almost smiled. Everything. The next 3 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. Alara tested every child, recording their progress with meticulous detail. She drafted letters to former contacts, people she hadn't spoken to in years, begging for endorsements, testimonials, anything that might lend credibility to the school. Rowan worked his own angles. He wrote to members of parliament, calling in favors from men who owed him debts or remembered his family's name. He hired a solicitor from Manchester, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace Pemberton, who specialized in fighting government overreach. Your case is weak, Grace said bluntly during their first meeting. You have no accreditation, no formal training, and you've antagonized some very powerful people. So we're doomed, Alara said. I didn't say that. I said your case is weak. Weak cases can still win if you know where to press. Grace leaned forward. What you need is public support. Make enough noise and the society will think twice about shutting you down. Politicians hate bad press. How do we make noise? Grace smiled. You let me worry about that. True to her word, Grace began a campaign. She contacted newspaper editors, framing the story as rural school under threat from London elites. She arranged for sympathetic journalists to visit Ashford Crossing, to see the children in action, to interview parents. One journalist, a young man named Peter Whitman from the Manchester Guardian, stayed for 3 days. He sat in on lessons, watched Alara teach, spoke with families. When he left, he clasped her hand. "This is a good thing you're doing here," he said. "I'll make sure people know." His article ran 2 weeks later, front page. London society threatens village school. They want us ignorant, say parents. The backlash was immediate. Letters poured into Parliament. Other newspapers picked up the story. Within days, the London Educational Reform Society was fielding questions from MPS, from donors, from the public. Harriet Langford issued a statement claiming the investigation was routine, that the society's only concern was child welfare. But the damage was done. Grace called Alara with an update. They're rattled. Langford's scrambling to control the narrative. This is good. Is it enough? Not yet, but it's a start. The formal investigation began on day 23. 2 inspectors arrived from London, a severe-looking man named Mr. Carlyle and a younger woman named Miss Shaw. They spent the first day touring the village, inspecting the schoolhouse, interviewing parents. Alara watched from a distance, her stomach knotted with anxiety. That evening, the inspectors requested a formal meeting with her and Rowan. They gathered in the small parlor of Rowan's manor. Carlyle sat stiff-backed in a chair, his hands folded over a leather portfolio. Shaw perched on the edge of the sofa, taking notes. "Miss Whitcomb," Carlyle began, "we've reviewed your curriculum, your student assessments, and the testimonials provided by parents. We've also read Mr. Whitman's article in The Guardian." Alara's pulse hammered. And we find your methods unorthodox. Unorthodox isn't illegal. No, but operating without proper oversight is. Carlyle opened his portfolio, extracting a sheet of paper. According to the Education Act of 1844, all schools must be registered with the Crown and subject to annual inspections by certified authorities. "We were planning to register," Rowan interjected. "The flood delayed us." "Planning is not compliance, Mr. Hale." Shaw looked up from her notes. "However, the Act also allows for provisional status in cases of demonstrated need and community support." Carlyle shot her a look. Shaw ignored him. "What I'm seeing here is a community that desperately needed a school and an educator who stepped in when no one else would. That's not negligence. That's initiative." Carlyle's jaw tightened. "The Society's concerns go beyond registration. There are questions about Miss Whitcomb's qualifications, her methods, her defiance," Shaw interrupted quietly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? She embarrassed Cornelius Webb, and now the Society wants her punished." "Miss Shaw, I've been doing this for 6 years, Mr. Carlyle. I know the difference between a legitimate investigation and a vendetta." She turned to Alara. "Your students' test scores are remarkable. Several are reading at levels 2 years above their age. Your classroom management is effective. Your curriculum is comprehensive. By any objective measure, this school is succeeding." Alara's breath caught. "So you'll recommend we stay open?" Shaw hesitated. "I will, but Mr. Carlyle outranks me." Carlyle stood abruptly. "This conversation is inappropriate. Miss Shaw, we'll discuss your conduct later." He looked at Alara, his expression cold. "You'll receive our official report within the week. Good evening." He left without another word. Shaw lingered, gathering her notes. When Carlyle was gone, she met Alara's eyes. "Fight this," she said softly. "Don't let them win." Then she was gone too. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Well, that was something. Was it enough? I don't know, but Shaw gave us ammunition. If Carlyle tries to shut you down, we can argue bias." Alara sank into a chair, exhaustion crashing over her. "I'm so tired, Rowan." He crouched in front of her, his dark eyes steady. "I know, but you can't stop now. We're too close." "Close to what? Winning? Losing? I can't even tell anymore." "Close to proving them wrong. That's all that matters." The report arrived 6 days later. Alara opened it with trembling hands, Rowan reading over her shoulder. The first 3 pages were dense legal language, citations of regulations, procedural notes, formalities. Then came the findings. While the school operated without formal registration, evidence suggests this was due to extenuating circumstances rather than willful negligence. Student assessments indicate significant educational progress. Community support is overwhelming. However, concerns remain regarding long-term sustainability and oversight. Recommendation: Provisional approval for 1 year, contingent upon formal registration and quarterly inspections. Alara read it twice, then a third time. We won, she whispered. Not quite. But we didn't lose. Rowan's hand found her shoulder. It's a foothold. We can work with it. Alara laughed, high and shaky, relief and disbelief tangled together. We actually did it. You did it? She turned to face him, her vision blurring. We did it together. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Rowan pulled her into a hug, quick, fierce, almost awkward. When he pulled back, his expression was carefully neutral. I'll contact Grace. She'll want to publicize this. Right, yes. Good. Alara wiped her eyes. I should tell the parents, the children. Go. I'll handle the paperwork. She left the manor half running, the report clutched to her chest. The village erupted when they heard. Parents cheered. Children danced in the square. Someone broke out a bottle of whiskey that had been aging since before the flood, and even the most stoic villagers allowed themselves a drink. Tom found Alara in the crowd and hugged her waist. We're staying open? We're staying open. Forever? For now. That's enough. That night, after the celebrations died down, Alara sat alone in the schoolhouse. She lit a candle and opened the ledger where she'd been recording student progress. Page after page of names, scores, notes, evidence of lives changing, futures opening. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. The door opened. Edmund Ashford stepped inside. Alara's hand froze on the ledger. What are you doing here? I heard about the investigation. He stopped, looking around the small room. I wanted to see if you were all right. I'm fine. Good. That's good. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I also wanted to apologize. Again, I know you don't want to hear it, but you're right. I don't. Alara, please, just listen. He took a step closer. I've been trying to rebuild my life, sell the estate, pay off debts. It's been hell. But through all of it, I kept thinking about you, about what you said. What did I say? That I'd have to learn to be a better person on my own. You were right. He laughed bitterly. I've been failing spectacularly, but I'm trying. Alara studied him. He looked rough, unshaven, his clothes worn, his eyes shadowed. But there was something different, something less polished, more real. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I need you to know that I'm not the same man who destroyed you. I'm trying not to be. That's good, Edmund, truly. But it doesn't change anything between us. I know. He nodded slowly. I'm not here to win you back. I needed you to know that you changed me. Even if you never forgive me, you changed me. Alara's throat tightened. I hope you figure it out. I really do. Edmund smiled, small, sad, genuine. Thank you. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I read the articles. About the school. What you've built here is extraordinary. It's not just me. No, but it started with you. He met her eyes one last time. You were always braver than I deserved. Then he left. Alara sat in the silence, the candle flickering. She didn't forgive him, couldn't. But for the first time, she didn't hate him either. She just felt nothing. And that, she realized, was its own kind of freedom. The following week, Grace Pemberton arrived with news. The society's backing down, she said, barely containing her grin. Langford sent a formal letter conceding the investigation. They're not happy about it, but they're done. Alara exhaled. It's really over? For now. But you'll need to register the school properly, keep up with inspections, stay out of trouble. I can do that. Can you? Grace raised an eyebrow. Because staying out of trouble doesn't seem to be your strong suit. Alara laughed. I'll try. Good. Because you've made powerful enemies, Miss Whitcomb. And powerful enemies have long memories. So do I. Grace's smile widened. I believe that. After Grace left, Rowan found Alara on the hill overlooking the village. You look thoughtful, he said, sitting beside her. I am thoughtful. About what? About what comes next. She pulled her knees to her chest. We won the fight, but the war's not over. Webb, Langford, the society, they'll come after us again if we give them a reason. Then we don't give them a reason. Is that possible? Can we really build something that lasts? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. Alara looked at him. Why? Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of something that matters, and I don't want to lose that. He met her gaze. I don't want to lose you. The words hung in the cold air. Alara's heart stuttered. Rowan, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. She didn't know what to say, didn't know what she felt. Everything was too tangled. Gratitude, admiration, fear. Something deeper she wasn't ready to name. So instead she reached out and took his hand. He stiffened, then relaxed, his fingers curling around hers. They sat like that as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. And for the first time since she'd left London, Alara felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. 2 months later, the school held its first official graduation. It wasn't grand, just a small ceremony in the square, families gathered, children dressed in their best clothes. Alara handed out certificates she'd made herself, each one signed and dated. When she called Tom's name, he bounded forward, grinning. Congratulations, she said, handing him the certificate. Does this mean I'm smart now? It means you worked hard. That's better than smart. Tom looked at the certificate, his expression suddenly serious. Miss Whitcomb? Yes, thank you for not giving up on us. Alara's eyes burned. Thank you for not giving up on me. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and children ran wild, a carriage arrived. It was plain, unmarked. A woman stepped out, older, elegantly dressed, her silver hair pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She approached Alara with a measured smile. Miss Whitcomb, my name is Margaret Thornton. I'm a philanthropist from Manchester. I've been following your story. Alara's stomach tightened. Have you? Yes, and I'm impressed. Margaret glanced around the square. What you've accomplished here is remarkable. I'd like to help. Help how? Funding, resources, political support. I have connections in Parliament, contacts in the education sector. If you're interested, I'd like to partner with you to expand this model to other villages. Alara blinked. Expand? Why limit yourself to Ashford Crossing? There are dozens of communities like this one, desperate for schools, for teachers, for hope. You've proven it can be done. Now let's prove it can be scaled. Rowan appeared at Alara's elbow, his expression wary. And what do you get out of this? Margaret smiled. The satisfaction of knowing I helped change lives. I'm not Cornelius Webb, Mr. Hale. I don't need plaques or speeches. I just want to see this succeed. Alara and Rowan exchanged a glance. We'll need to discuss it, Alara said carefully. Of course. Take your time. Margaret handed her a card. But don't take too long. Opportunity doesn't wait. She returned to her carriage and left. Alara stared at the card, her mind racing. Do you trust her? Rowan asked. I don't know, but I think we have to try. Even if it's a risk? Especially if it's a risk. She looked at him. Isn't that what we've been doing all along? Rowan's mouth quirked. I suppose it is. That night, as the village settled into sleep, Alara stood in the empty schoolhouse. She walked between the rows of benches, trailing her fingers along the worn wood. She thought about the children who sat here every day, about Tom and Bess and all the others who'd learned to see the world as something they could shape instead of something that shaped them. She thought about Edmund, broken and trying to rebuild, about Victoria, trapped in a prison of her own making, about Rowan, scarred and steady, fighting his own demons beside her. And she thought about herself, the girl who'd stood in a ballroom and watched her life shatter, the woman who'd walked away and built something new from the wreckage. She wasn't perfect. She still doubted herself, still woke in the middle of the night wondering if she was doing enough, being enough. But she was here, and she was fighting, and that, she was beginning to understand, was its own kind of victory. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. Rowan stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Too much to think about. Want company? Always. He crossed the room and stood beside her, both of them looking out at the quiet village. We're really doing this, aren't we? Alara said. Building something that lasts. Looks like it. Are you scared? Terrified. She laughed softly. Good. Me too. Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness, warm and solid. And standing there in the schoolhouse they'd built together, Alara felt the future unfold before her, uncertain, dangerous, filled with possibility. She didn't know what came next, but for the first time in her life, that didn't scare her. It excited her. The partnership with Margaret Thornton began cautiously, like two cats circling each other in the dark. Margaret visited Ashford Crossing monthly, always arriving with ledgers and proposals, always leaving with pages of notes. She was efficient, methodical, and frustratingly opaque about her true motives. But her money was real, and her connections opened doors Elora hadn't known existed. Within 6 months, 3 more schools opened in nearby villages, each modeled on Ashford Crossing, each staffed by teachers Margaret had recruited and Elora had trained. The work was exhausting. Elora traveled constantly, splitting her time between villages, reviewing curricula, solving problems that ranged from leaking roofs to parents who didn't trust outsiders. But it was working. By the end of the first year, enrollment across all 4 schools had reached nearly 200 children. Reading rates climbed. Parents who'd been skeptical became advocates. And slowly, quietly, the model began to attract attention beyond Manchester. Then Parliament noticed. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Elora was in the Ashford Crossing schoolhouse, helping Bess with long division, when Rowan appeared in the doorway holding an official-looking envelope sealed with red wax. "You need to see this," he said. Elora excused herself and stepped outside. Rowan handed her the letter without a word. It was from the House of Commons Select Committee on Education. They were conducting hearings on rural education reform, and they wanted Elora to testify. Her hands went numb. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not. Margaret's name is on the CC line. She must have submitted your work as evidence." "Without asking me." "Apparently." Elora read the letter again, her pulse hammering. The hearing was in 6 weeks, in London, in front of MPs, lords, bureaucrats, the entire machinery of power she'd spent 3 years avoiding. "I can't do this," she said. "Yes, you can. Rowan, I'll be in a room full of people who think I'm a joke, who remember the scandal, the humiliation, who remember a version of you that doesn't exist anymore." He took her shoulders gently. "You're not the woman who ran away from that ballroom. You're the woman who rebuilt a village, who created a model that's changing lives. They need to see that. What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing and destroy everything we've built?" "Then we'll rebuild again. We always do." Elora closed her eyes, fighting the panic rising in her chest. "I need to think. Think fast. The hearing's in 6 weeks." That night, Elora barely slept. She lay awake replaying every possible disaster, stumbling over words, being laughed at, having her past thrown in her face. By dawn, she'd convinced herself that testifying was suicide. But when she walked into the schoolhouse that morning, Tom was waiting. "Miss Whitcomb, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is it true you're going to talk to Parliament?" News traveled faster than wildfire in the village. "I might be." "Why?" Tom's face lit up. "Because that's brilliant. You're going to tell them about us, right? About how we're not stupid just because we're poor?" Elora's throat tightened. "That's the idea." "Good, because someone needs to." He grinned, gap-toothed and fierce. "Make them listen, miss. Make them see us." And just like that, the fear crystallized into something harder, something sharp. She couldn't do this for herself, but she could do it for Tom, for Bess, for every child who'd ever been told they didn't matter. She found Margaret that afternoon. Margaret was staying at Rowan's Manor, reviewing financial reports in the study. She looked up when Elora entered, her expression unreadable. "I assume you received the summons," Margaret said. "You should have asked me first." "Would you have said yes?" "No." "Exactly." Margaret set down her pen. "Elora, what we're doing here is extraordinary, but it's fragile. One bad crop season, one political shift, and it could all collapse. If we want this to last, we need institutional support, government funding, legal protection. The hearing is our chance to secure that. By putting me on display, by giving you a platform." Margaret's voice softened. "I know what I'm asking. I know London hurt you, but this isn't about the past. It's about the future. Your future. These children's future." Elora sank into a chair. "What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together. But I don't think you will." "Why not?" Margaret smiled. "Because you're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. And stubbornness, when properly directed, is a formidable weapon." Despite everything, Elora almost laughed. The next 5 weeks were a controlled frenzy. Grace Pemberton arrived to help prepare Elora's testimony. They spent hours rehearsing answers, anticipating questions, refining arguments. Grace was ruthless, poking holes in every weak spot, forcing Alara to defend her methods, her choices, her very existence. They'll try to rattle you, Grace said during one particularly brutal session. They'll bring up the scandal, your lack of formal credentials, your defiance of Webb. You need to stay calm. How? By remembering that you're not asking for their approval. You're demanding they recognize what you've already accomplished. Rowan helped in his own way, digging up information on the committee members, identifying allies and enemies, mapping the political landscape. He discovered that 2 MPs on the committee had rural constituencies desperate for education funding. That was leverage. Focus on them, he advised. Ignore the ones who are hostile. Speak to the ones who might actually listen. Margaret handled logistics, arranging lodging in London, coordinating with the committee, ensuring Alara had everything she needed. But as the hearing approached, Alara felt the old fear creeping back. She was going to walk into the lion's den, and this time she couldn't just walk out. They traveled to London 3 days before the hearing. The city was exactly as Alara remembered, loud, crowded, suffocating. But this time she didn't hide. She walked through the streets with her head high, Rowan at her side, refusing to flinch when people stared. On the day of the hearing, she dressed carefully, not in the fine silks she'd once worn, but in a simple dark blue dress, professional, practical, unadorned. She braided her hair, pinned it tight, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the girl who'd been humiliated in a ballroom. She was someone else entirely. The hearing took place in a grand chamber within Parliament, wood-paneled walls, vaulted ceilings, rows of seats filled with MPs, lords, journalists, and curious onlookers. Alara sat at a table facing the committee, her hands folded to keep them from shaking. Grace sat beside her. Rowan and Margaret were in the gallery, watching. The chairman, Lord Pembroke, a silver-haired man with a voice like gravel, called the session to order. Miss Whitcomb, you've been summoned to provide testimony regarding rural education initiatives in the North. The committee has reviewed the documentation submitted by Mrs. Thornton. We'd like to hear from you directly. Alara stood. Thank you, Lord Pembroke. Let's begin with the basics. You operate a school in Ashford Crossing, correct? Yes, my lord, along with 3 affiliated schools in neighboring villages. And what qualifies you to run these institutions? The question was polite, but the implication was clear. I have no formal teaching credentials, Alara said evenly, but I have 3 years of practical experience. I've taught over 200 children to read, write, and think critically. I've developed curricula tailored to rural communities, and I've proven that education can thrive outside traditional structures. A murmur rippled through the chamber. One of the MPs, a stern-faced man named Mr. Blackwell, leaned forward. Miss Whitcomb, isn't it true that you previously operated your school without proper accreditation? That you were investigated by the London Educational Reform Society for negligence? Alara's stomach tightened. Here it was. Yes, Mr. Blackwell. We operated without formal registration initially because we were responding to an emergency. The village school had burned down, and children were going uneducated. I chose to act rather than wait for bureaucratic approval. And the society found you compliant only after significant public pressure. Doesn't that suggest your methods are questionable? It suggests that the society prioritizes control over outcomes. My students' test scores speak for themselves. They're thriving. That should be the measure of success, not paperwork. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. You have a rather cavalier attitude toward regulation, Miss Whitcomb. I have a pragmatic attitude toward children's futures, Mr. Blackwell. Regulation matters, but results matter more. Another MP, a younger man named Mr. Davies, spoke up. Miss Whitcomb, I represent a constituency in Wales with similar challenges. Can you describe your model in practical terms? How might it be replicated? Alara seized the opening. She walked the committee through the model: community involvement, adaptive curricula, teacher training, sustainable funding. She talked about Tom, about Bess, about families that had been transformed. She cited statistics, shared testimonials, painted a picture of what was possible when communities were given resources instead of excuses. As she spoke, she watched the room. Some MPs looked skeptical, others intrigued. A few, like Davies, leaned forward, genuinely engaged. When she finished, Pembroke nodded. Thank you, Miss Whitcomb. The committee will now deliberate. Wait. The voice came from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned. Harriet Langford stood, her expression icy. Lord Pembroke, if I may, I represent the London Educational Reform Society, and I must object to this testimony. Pembroke frowned. On what grounds? Miss Whitcomb's methods are unproven. Her schools lack proper oversight, and her personal history raises serious questions about her judgment. Alara's blood went cold. Harriet continued. 3 years ago, Miss Whitcomb was publicly jilted by Lord Ashford. She fled London in disgrace, abandoning her responsibilities to her family and her station. And now she's positioned herself as an expert on education? It's absurd. The chamber erupted in whispers. Grace stood immediately. Lord Pembroke, this is character assassination, not testimony. Miss Langford's comments are irrelevant to the matter at hand. They're entirely relevant, Harriet shot back. If we're entrusting children's futures to this woman, we have a right to know who she is. And what she is a failed socialite playing teacher. Alara felt the room tilt. Every eye was on her. The whispers grew louder. Then someone else stood. Victoria Harlow. She was in the gallery, dressed in mourning black, her face pale but composed. Lord Pembroke, she said clearly, may I speak? Pembroke hesitated. This is highly irregular, Lady Ashford. I understand, but I have information relevant to this discussion. Very well, briefly. Victoria stepped forward, her hands clasped. Miss Langford is correct about one thing. Alara Whitcomb was jilted by my late husband. Late husband. The words hit Alara like a punch. Edmund was dead? Victoria continued, her voice steady. But Miss Langford is wrong about everything else. Alara didn't flee in disgrace. She left because she refused to be diminished by a society that valued wealth over character. And in doing so, she became something far more valuable than any of us. She became useful. Harriet's face reddened. Lady Ashford, I married Edmund Ashford for his title and his money, Victoria interrupted. And I spent 2 miserable years in a loveless marriage, pretending it was enough. Alara walked away from that same trap and built something real, something that matters. If that's disgrace, then I envy her disgrace. The chamber went silent. Victoria turned to Alara, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You were right, Alara. That night in London when you told me to leave him and build my own life. I should have listened, but I was too afraid. Edmund died 6 months ago, a riding accident, and only then did I realize how much of myself I'd sacrificed for nothing. Don't let them do that to you again. Don't let them make you small. Then she sat down. Pembroke cleared his throat. Miss Whitcomb, do you have anything to add? Alara's hands were shaking, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. Yes, Miss Langford is right. I'm not perfect. I made mistakes. I was humiliated. I ran. But I also learned that worth isn't something given by society. It's something you build. And what I've built, what we've all built, in Ashford Crossing and beyond is proof that people can change, that communities can thrive when given a chance. So yes, I'm a failed socialite, but I'm also a teacher, a builder, someone who refuses to be defined by my worst moment. She looked directly at Harriet. You can call me whatever you want, but you can't erase what I've accomplished, and you can't stop me from fighting for these children. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Davies began to clap. It spread, slowly at first, then building. MPs joined, gallery observers stood. Even Pembroke nodded. Harriet stood frozen, her face a mask of fury. Pembroke gavelled for order. The committee will adjourn to deliberate. Miss Whitcomb, you'll be notified of our decision within the week. The session ended. Alara walked out of the chamber in a daze. Grace gripped her arm, grinning. Rowan appeared, pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. Margaret simply nodded, satisfied. But Alara barely registered any of it, because Victoria was waiting in the corridor. They stood facing each other, 2 women who'd been enemies, rivals, strangers. Edmund's really gone, Alara asked softly. Victoria nodded. 3 days after I told him I was leaving him. His horse threw him during a hunt. Broken neck. Instant. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices. Victoria's smile was sad. We all did. What will you do now? I'm selling the estate, using the money to fund scholarships for girls who can't afford education. She laughed quietly. Turns out being a widow with money and no obligations is rather liberating. Alara's eyes burned. I'm glad. So am I. Victoria extended her hand. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Alara took her hand. Thank you for speaking up. It was long overdue. They stood there for another moment. Then Victoria turned and walked away, her black skirt swirling. And Alara felt something inside her shift, a weight she'd been carrying for years, finally lifting. The committee's decision arrived 5 days later. Alara was back in Ashford Crossing, teaching a geography lesson, when Rowan burst into the schoolhouse waving a letter. They approved it, he said, breathless. All of it. Funding, legal recognition, expansion. The committee's recommending your model be adopted nationwide. Alara stared at him. What? You did it. You actually did it. The children erupted in cheers. Tom jumped on his desk. Bess hugged the girl next to her. Alara sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. They'd won. Not just survived. Not just scraped by. Won. That evening, the village threw a celebration. Tables were dragged into the square. Food appeared from every household: bread, cheese, roasted meat, pies. Someone produced a fiddle. Children danced, adults drank and laughed and told stories. Alara stood at the edge of it all, watching, still half convinced it wasn't real. Rowan found her there. You should be celebrating, he said. I am, just quietly. That's not like you. She smiled. Maybe I'm changing. Don't change too much. He paused. There's something I need to tell you. Alara's stomach flipped. What? I'm leaving. The world went still. What? Not forever, just for a while. Rowan's expression was careful. Margaret's offered me a position helping coordinate the new schools. It means traveling, administrative work, politics, things I'm actually good at. But you don't need me here anymore, Alara. You've got teachers, funding, community support. You'll be fine. That's not the point. Her voice cracked. I don't want to do this without you. You won't be. I'll visit. We'll write. But you've built something extraordinary here, and I think it's time you led it without someone looking over your shoulder. Is that what you've been doing? Looking over my shoulder? Maybe, a little, he smiled, but mostly I've just been trying to keep up. Alara's vision blurred. When do you leave? 2 weeks. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Rowan's hand found hers. This isn't goodbye, Alara. It's just a shift. I know, She swallowed hard. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too. They stood there, hands linked, watching the village celebrate around them. And Alara realized with a clarity that was almost painful that she was in love with him. Had been for a while, probably. Maybe since the day he'd helped her rebuild the school, maybe earlier. But she didn't say it. Because some things, she was learning, didn't need to be said out loud to be true. Rowan left on a gray morning in early May. Alara stood in the square, watching his carriage pull away, her heart heavy but steady. Tom appeared at her elbow. Will he come back? I think so. Good. I like him. Me too. Tom studied her. You look sad. A little, but also proud? Alara glanced down at him. How do you know that? Because that's how I feel when something's hard but good. He grinned. Like finishing a book. Alara laughed despite herself. Exactly like that. The months that followed were a whirlwind. More schools opened, teachers were trained, curricula expanded. Alara traveled constantly, but always returned to Ashford Crossing. It was her anchor, her proof that all of this was real. Letters from Rowan arrived weekly. Updates on his work, stories from the road, questions about the schools. Alara wrote back just as often, filling pages with details and ideas and things she couldn't quite bring herself to say. And slowly, the world began to change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but piece by piece, village by village, child by child. 1 year after the hearing, Alara received an invitation. The Royal Society for the Advancement of Education wanted to honor her work. There would be a ceremony, a medal, a speech in London. Alara almost declined, but then she thought about Tom, about Victoria, about every child who'd looked at her and seen possibility instead of limitation. So she went. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, filled with dignitaries, educators, journalists. Alara wore the same dark blue dress she'd worn to the hearing. She didn't need anything fancier. When her name was called, she walked to the podium. The president of the society, a kindly old scholar named Dr. Whitfield, presented her with a gold medal for exceptional contributions to rural education and tireless advocacy for children's futures, he said. The audience applauded. Alara accepted the medal, then turned to face the crowd. Thank you, she began, but this medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every parent who trusted me with their child. Every teacher who took a chance on a new model. Every student who proved that potential has nothing to do with birthright. She paused, scanning the crowd. And there, in the back row, was Rowan. He smiled. Alara's heart lifted. 3 years ago, I came to a village with nothing but desperation and stubbornness. I didn't know what I was doing. I made mistakes. I failed more times than I can count. But I kept going, because the children deserve someone who wouldn't give up on them. Her voice steadied. This medal is proof that we can rebuild, that we can take the worst moments of our lives and turn them into something meaningful. It's proof that worth isn't inherited, it's earned. And it's proof that when we fight for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's terrifying, we can change the world. The applause was deafening, but Alara barely heard it, because Rowan was walking toward her through the crowd. When he reached her, he didn't say anything, just took her hand. And in that moment, surrounded by applause and recognition and all the validation she'd once thought she needed, Alara realized something. She'd already won, not because of the medal or the schools or the acclaim, but because she'd become someone she was proud to be. That night, after the ceremony, Alara and Rowan walked through London's streets. The city was quieter at this hour, the crowds thinned, the noise muted. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the Thames. Rowan stopped, looking out at the water. Do you ever regret it, leaving London the first time? No. Do you regret leaving your old life? Not anymore. He turned to face her. Alara, there's something I need to tell you. Her pulse quickened. What? I love you. I have for a while. And I know the timing's complicated, and I know you've built this incredible life, and I don't want to disrupt that. But I needed you to know. Alara's breath caught. I love you too, she said. Rowan blinked. You do? Yes. I've been too afraid to say it. Afraid of losing what we have, afraid of repeating past mistakes. But I'm done being afraid. He stepped closer. So what do we do? We figure it out, together. No promises it'll be easy. I don't want easy. I want real. Rowan smiled, slow, genuine, full of something that looked like hope. Then he kissed her. And Alara kissed him back, there on the banks of the Thames, in the city that had once destroyed her. Because this wasn't the same city. And she wasn't the same woman. 6 months later, Alara stood in the Ashford Crossing schoolhouse. It was early morning before the children arrived. She walked through the rows of benches, straightened books, adjusted slates. The door opened. Rowan stepped inside carrying 2 cups of tea. Thought you might need this, he said. Always. She accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth. They'd married quietly 3 months ago. A simple ceremony in the village with Tom and Bess as witnesses. No grand affair. No society approval. Just 2 people choosing each other. Rowan had moved into a cottage near the manor, splitting his time between administrative work and helping Alara with the schools. It wasn't perfect. They argued sometimes, disagreed about methods, about priorities, about 1,000 small things. But they worked. What are you thinking about? Rowan asked. How far we've come, how much has changed. Any regrets? Just one. He raised an eyebrow. What's that? That I didn't slap Edmund harder. Rowan laughed. There's still time. He's dead, Rowan. Details. Alara smiled, leaning against him. Outside, the first children began arriving, their voices rising in the morning air, full of questions and energy and endless possibility. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd imagined standing in that ballroom 3 years ago, but the one she'd built, piece by piece, choice by choice. And it was enough. No, it was more than enough. It was everything. Tom burst through the door, grinning. Miss Whitcomb, I finished the book you gave me. Already? That was 200 pages. I know. Can I have another? Alara laughed. Of course. She handed him a new book, watching his face light up. And in that moment, she understood. This was the legacy she'd built. Not wealth, not status, not the approval of people who'd never mattered, but this, children reading, learning, becoming. Communities thriving, lives changing. Rowan's hand found the small of her back. Ready for another day? Alara looked at the children filling the schoolhouse, at the village beyond, at the future stretching ahead, uncertain, challenging, full of promise. Always, she said, and she meant it.